Okay, thank you all for coming. Thanks for your time. As mentioned there, we're going to talk about here, you can't stop what you can't see. So I'm going to go through our demonstration, show you a bit of a ransomware attack. But first of all, we're going to talk about what your teams are going through these days. So you're all probably perfectly well aware that your cybersecurity teams are very challenged these days. They've got a lot on their plate and they work in very complex environments. Doing everything from a myriad of different devices right the way through to a multitude of interconnected platforms. They've got many things they've got to cover, and these can range from users in hybrid workspaces through to traditional infrastructure, all the way through to workloads working across multiple clouds. And this can be really challenging, right? So the ever-changing threat landscape means that they find it difficult to keep up with these advanced threats, tactics and techniques used by attackers these days. And that can cause a lot of stress. And you've mentioned in the last session, I think you were on, they were talking about cybersecurity burnout. So that's actually a real thing. And in fact, Forrester have recently done a report that effectively says that across the US and Europe, we have 66% of your staff suffer from significant stress. And 51% of those are actually prescribed medication for mental health issues. Now, retention and recruitment in cyber is very volatile these days and difficult to keep up with. And it's these guys that are keeping them awake at night, right? So adversaries are now coming up with more and more inventive ways of creating new methods of getting into your environment and compromising what you have. So it's important, really, when you look at your teams, to look at retention of staff. You want to arm them with the best tools possible to make sure that they can perform the job effectively for you, to protect your assets and protect your organization. You might ask, what type of tooling would that be, right? What do I need to know? Well, in reality, you can't really address that question unless you understand what the problem is. So we need to look fundamentally at what the problem is that you have to face in order to try and combat it. To illustrate this, I'm going to show you a ransomware attack in under 5 minutes, right? So I recorded this a bit earlier. You'll see here I have an attacker over in Stockholm in Sweden, and I have a box here in the Midlands that is going to be my target. Now, this was actually recorded in real time, right? So you might get this idea in your head that ransomware attacks take prolonged periods of time, and in some cases they do. They can take months in order to get to the goal they're looking for. But in this case, this could be a realistic attack. We could be doing a smash and grab here and getting out with your data before you know it. So to give a bit of background on this, I'm going to show you this, a bit of a unique perspective where you see what the attacker does and you get to see what the victim does on the endpoint. As an attacker, I would have looked at what my goal is going to be. So I've profiled this organization. I've had a look and decided that I want their IP because I've understood from looking at different forums that they're actually a development company who've developed IP over, let's say, the last 12 months, and they've got some brand new revolutionary program that they're going to release. And I want to get that. So I'm going to do some social engineering. I'm going to do some preamble. I've had a look on the internet. I've had a look on LinkedIn, and I've come across a user called Amy Daly, who is effectively a developer in that organization, but she does have some fiscal responsibility as well. So I've decided that she's going to be a good target for me to attack in a phishing attack. Let's just walk through that. So here's Amy's desktop here, and the same as any normal user in your organization, she will have her documents, her office documents stored in her personal drive, but she will also have access to a shared drive she shares with her developer colleagues in order to keep her organization data in there. And these are the company crown jewels. Over in Stockholm, I've got a command and control server here where I've actually got a listener active, and I've also got a couple of web servers, one to download files if I need to deploy tools, one to upload files if I need to receive data. And you'll see on this last tab here, I've actually got an upload directory here, which currently has nothing in it. So we'll go back to my listener, and then we'll go through a phishing attack, spear phishing Amy on her desktop. So she goes in here quite innocently, and she opens her Microsoft Outlook. It's got an attachment in there. It's flagged as urgent, so we're trying to get an emotional response from the user. She will launch the Excel spreadsheet, and it comes up with some status figures. I see a button at the top. This is Enable Editing. I'll click on that, because why wouldn't I? And we have an Enable Content, so there may be macros in this spreadsheet. But clicking on this is actually giving me control of Amy's desktop. So going back out to my listening machine, you'll see I now have a callback, and I am on this machine in Stockholm with the same privileges as Amy has in her desktop. I can have a look at her environment using PowerShell, so I'm using tools that are baked in, living off the land, and I can see she's got access to a C drive, a D drive, and an S drive. I go into the S drive, and I have a look and see what's in there, and I can see the 4 shares that are available. If I go in and have a look in a developer's drive, I can then have a look in here, and here you can see I now have access to the company's crown jewels. So my next step here as an attacker is I want that data on my server. So I'm going to abuse PowerShell here, and I'm going to run a script that effectively zips up all of those files into a single archive. Then I'm going to export them out to my Stockholm server using HTTP, right? Commonly used protocol. If I do an ls in here, see I have jewels.zip. And if I unzip that folder, you can see I now have access to the company crown jewels. So now that I've got access to it, I'm going to deny you access to it, right? So I'm going to take this to the last stage, and I'm going to use PowerShell again here to deploy ransomware onto that endpoint and encrypt Amy's files. So as you see here, we just run a script. Again, this is native to the operating system. I'm not using any tooling of my own here. I run the script, it's going to download 1 or 2 files, and then it's going to execute against that. And that will give me control and the ability to zip up and completely destroy Amy's desktop. Going into my folders, you can see that I've started to see some unusual activity here in my documents. My wallpaper has now changed. In a few seconds, Microsoft's going to ask me if I want to allow changes to happen. I say no, but it's too late. Right? WannaCry has been deployed. I now have this on my desktop, and I'm now in trouble. Pay up $300 in Bitcoin to this address, otherwise I will delete your files. So the fundamental problem here is, what happened, right? We saw what happened, what the attacker did, but from Amy's desktop, we didn't see anything. And this is a problem. So I've got all my files here that I now cannot access, but worse than that, I'm collaborating with my colleagues and developers share. All of that data has also been encrypted, and they can no longer access that. Now you might say here, well, great, we've got some reinforcements in play here. I've got the ability now to restore my network from backups, invoke disaster recovery, whatever methodology you use. But you don't know what's happened, right? So what's to stop this from happening in a day, a week, a month again? And this takes us back to the strapline of the presentation, which is you can't stop what you can't see. So you need to have a fundamental understanding of what this attacker is actually doing in order to try and prevent it in future. So going back to the question I had before, what type of tools do you need? What capabilities do your tools need in order to try and get into this? You would need the ability here to look at behavior. What are attackers actually doing? And in order to do that, I need to see everything they're doing, all file modifications, all file executions, registry changes, network connections. And even when I'm exfiltrating that data, I need deep dive network information into the protocol that's being used and how we manage to get visibility of that. Wouldn't it be great if you could have a CCTV camera on there, recording that data constantly for all your users and uploading it to the cloud? This is what Carbon Black XDR is. Okay. So in addition to alerting you to these type of activities that attackers do, we give you a nice graphical representation here of everything the attacker does. Every command executed, every script that's run, the details of the script, all time and date stamped, all the information available to you to be able to record and look back at what's happened, to try and understand what that attacker did. Now this plays 2 roles, this data, right? So if you've got your security teams, they can use this tool to do what we call threat hunting, in which case we can look for things before bad things happen in your environment, and I can stop it from happening by taking action early. But even if the worst should happen and you do get ransomware, you have to have this ability to look back in time, understand exactly what happened on that desktop, unpick it, and be able to understand what happened in order to prevent it. We have another couple of tools in the toolkit here. And again, all of this stuff we're showing you here is in a single console with a single lightweight sensor. So here I have host-based firewall. So I can control all my desktop firewalls from here. In the example I've shown you here, I might want to allow my administrators to use PowerShell, but only use it on an internal subnet. I absolutely do not want any of my users in my environment using PowerShell to reach out to the internet, so I would explicitly block that from happening. And we also include in our product identity intelligence, right? So this is the ability for me to look. Something an attacker will commonly do is elevate their privileges. So once they establish that foothold, they'll try and elevate what they've got to do more damage and have more capabilities. So here we see the ability here with identity intelligence to look at authentication events and privilege escalation events. So if someone does change privileges and they elevate their status, we're able to spot that and look for that. And we're able to audit the events accordingly. Equally, attackers might want to carry out a brute force attack, right? They may be able to get your usernames, but they don't have the passwords. So they will use a password list and just password spray these accounts. And we'll show that up in the console as many failed, unsuccessful login attempts. So we're able to track that type of activity. So based on what we know, right? Amy opened Outlook, she launched Excel. Excel called PowerShell, which made a network connection. So we understand the nature of the attack, and now that we can understand what happened, we can prevent it from happening. So we have another tool in our toolkit here, which is again part of the product, called Next Generation Antivirus. Why next generation? Well, traditional antivirus is typically based on signatures, but those are no longer enough these days. We need to move beyond this. You need to understand the behavior and the tactics and techniques that attackers are going to use. So next generation antivirus does just that. Here I'm going to show you here policies that we assign to users' desktops. So when we install the agent, they get assigned to a policy. The three gray ones at the top are the out-of-the-box policies we've got. And these look for these bad attempts that people, bad actors are doing to try and get into your environment. So things like unknown files that are trying to scrape memory. They're trying to perform ransomware-like behavior, like encrypting or deleting backups. If they're trying to inject information into other processes. These are the type of things that they do. And you'll see in this out-of-the-box policy, there is actually one for Microsoft Office applications that try to invoke a command interpreter, of which PowerShell is one, and we deny that operation. So out of the box, by doing nothing, we would have stopped the attack I showed you earlier in its tracks before it had a chance to get established. So looking on that desktop, this kind of shows you what this is, right? So we've got this ability here. We go in, we open the desktop, we click on the buttons again, but this time when we enable that content, that PowerShell macro that called back is being stopped from speaking now and effectively blocked that attack before it actually happened. Now there's many, many other things that we've got in our portfolio, right? So we can do things like air-gapped environments on premises. We can do risk-based vulnerability management. We can do containers, Kubernetes, protection against all of those different things. So what I'll say, if you want to know more, then please go out to our booth at the front here, speak to our staff at the front, and we'll be able to give you more details if you need to know any more information on that. So with that, I'll say thank you for your time, and I hope you have the rest of a good event for the rest of the day.
Tom, thank you very much indeed.